Chapter 30. Christmas Break. Tap tap tap. Sirius cringed with every tap of the steak knife on his kitchen table. It had only been a day and a half since the arrival of his newest house guest, and already the youngest of them was driving him up the wall. Kadaj, as he was called, was hostile, violent, temperamental, and all around just downright insane. If left to his own devices, the boy would tear apart the house. He actually liked to antagonize his mother's painting. Though this morning he had woken up to find the young boy that looked so much like Harry to be sitting on the floor having a conversation about the best way to kill blood traitors with her. Sirius was starting to really regret saying yes to Harry about watching over the four boys. Yazoo and Lazard weren't a problem. Other than Yazoo's slightly insane personality, he was very quiet and charming. Lazard was very intelligent, and very much the Slytherin as he had been sorted into, through talking with the man he had come to learn. Lazard was in fact a Shinra as well, though a bastard half-son. Unknowingly he had worked his way up through Shinra to become director of Soldier. It was during his time there that he had learned of his true parentage and started to embezzle money from the company, all with no one being the wiser. Luz, as he was called, was like dealing with a very large, very powerful child. Sirius did regret the one and only time he had agreed to play with the brute of a man. While Luz had been very apologetic, that still didn't help his ribs. He laughed to being thrown across his own house. Feeling the wards shifting slightly, Sirius looked up from where he was sitting across from Kadaj and Lazard. He knew that the Weasleys were due to arrive any minute for Christmas, but this wasn't any of their signatures. Kadaj's head shot up, the first non-insane smile lighting his features. "Dad." Standing up, the little boy raced from the room. Chuckling, Lazard pushed himself up, adjusting his glasses. Sephiroth must have just ported in. Blinking, Sirius turned slightly to look at the young man across from him. Kadaj just called him father. Harry is not old enough to have a child. In either life. He is not a literal father to them. The triplets are clones of him. His cells gave them life. Yazoo and Luz both see him as more of a brother, but Kadaj sees him as their father. The two older just don't argue with the youngest, so they all call him father. Feeling the wards shivering again, he smiled, knowing it had to be Rhapsodos and Vincent coming in. The Dursleys must have forced Vincent's hand sooner if they are here already. Lazard turned back to Sirius, ignoring the thundering footsteps of Luz charging across the house to get to Sephiroth and the others. "Oh? Do tell." A light sparkled in Lazard's eyes. The boy was a prankster in his own right and loved a good devious plan. If it wasn't for the fact he was a bleeding-hearted Tseng, he could have very easily have been a Turk. This last Hogsmeade weekend, Vincent and I sat down for a very long talk, mostly about James, Harry's father this lifetime. I was tired of seeing my godson returning to school highly underweight and suffering from their abuse of him. With the ministry making all the students return home for the holidays, we decided it would be best to get Harry away from them permanently. With Vincent being a CIA agent already, it was easy for him to make a false ID card with James' name and picture. He would pretend to be James Potter that hadn't died but simply suffering from amnesia. Shaking his head, Lazard, if he were the Dursleys, wouldn't have believed that story for a minute. I would say it worked. Understatement, director. Hook, line, and sinker. Sephiroth moved into the room. Kadaj happily leached onto his side as was normal. And what makes this all the better is Vernon is now being whisked off to a lovely room with a view of Bubba next cell over. "You got him arrested?" Kadaj looked up at Sephiroth with a manic look in his acid green eyes. Smiling gently, Sephiroth ran a hand through Kadaj's hair, moving it away from his face. "I figured since they were there it would be the perfect opportunity to bring to light some of the Dursleys' parental shortcomings." Laughing, Kadaj moved to sit down in his recently vacated seat, laying sober on the table in front of him. Looking over Sephiroth, Sirius felt his brow rising, seeing the massive amounts of leather and the bare chest. What's with the get-up? He didn't realize this was Sephiroth's battle attire, as he had only seen a picture of him once, and unlike the others he didn't have a photographic memory. "This is my normal attire, at least it was for the days I was not held up in my office working on paperwork. Sephiroth tilted his head to the side, his bangs falling across his face, a small smile crossing his face. Yes, Wyatt Soldier seemed to have a leather fetish. He used to hear that all the time when he was down around civilians. He had set the trend and Genesis had only increased it. While the uniforms of the main soldier were a heavy-duty Kevlar cloth, the first classes which were allowed personalization to their uniform tended to emulate Sephiroth and Genesis' own attire. Though as Genesis loved to point out with his normal arrogance, none of them could pull it off like they did. He actually had to agree with Genesis there. Zack had managed to steal Genesis' coat one day and was running around in it for the better part of the afternoon. While it had been funny as hell to watch, especially when Genesis had found out and proceeded to chase the puppy all around the soldier floor, he hadn't been able to pull off the look. I never understood how you all could battle in leather. I tried simply spending a day in leather and I chafed horribly. Lazard was watching them with curious eyes. Looking up, he felt the wards shift again, and this time the loud voice of a certain puppy could be heard from upstairs. It takes time to break the leather in. When I first had this outfit made, I chafed pretty horribly too. A small smile lit up Sephiroth's feathers seconds before he was bowled over by a very hyperactive puppy. Squeaking Kadaj got the hell out of dodge and pushed himself under the table seconds before Zack slammed into Sephiroth, sending them both down tumbling to the ground in a giant heap of tangled limbs and leather. Seph, you are never gonna believe this. Zack sat up on his hips, starting to bounce. If they weren't fully clothed it would look very suggestive right now. That you are breaking my hip. Yes, I can believe that. Flushing slightly, Zack stopped bouncing but stayed where he was too damn hyper to move at the moment. Reno went to Malfoy's. Sitting up, Sephiroth just stared at Zack. How the hell had Reno managed to get away from Molly and over to Shinra's? How? I thought Reno was a hell of a lot more intelligent than that. I don't know, Seph. He got a call right before we were to port out and he gave said CEO I got a boyfriend to go please, and he was gone. Sighing, Sephiroth let his head fall back onto the hard stone floor with a sound thunk. Called Tseng. See what he wants us to do. Tseng. Your phone's ringing. Feeling the body under him shifting, Tseng slowly peeled his eyes open. Why did someone have to call him now? He had finally fallen asleep after fucking the blonde bombshell under him into the mattress. He was exhausted and just wanted to sleep with his personal mecha-fueled heater. Can you grab it? You're closer. You can get up easier than I can. You calling me easy? Snorting, Cloud shoved the Utai Turk off him, listening to him laugh. You're perverted, you know that. Mind of a 45-year-old. With 15-year-old perverseness. Laughing softly, Tseng spread out across the bed, taking up the entirety of the warmth, as Cloud sat up to grab his phone. It's Zack. He held it out but growled, seeing his bed completely taken up by a very naked Turk. And where am I supposed to lay down? Hush. Phone. Tseng stuck his tongue out at the blonde, flipping the phone open. What do you want, Zack? Growling at his husband, Cloud decided it was time to get even. Moving up the lean body, he snaked his tongue up along the small birthmark that drove his beloved nuts. A loud gasp was his reward, along with a cuffing against his head. Sorry, Cloud's being a pervert at the moment. Tseng bit his lip hard to keep from moaning as Cloud returned to that spot once more. Oh, the blonde was so getting it once he was off the phone. He went where? God. I am so fucking gonna kill Cloud after I fuck his brains out again. Alright, give him a call, make sure he's alright, and then string him up by his balls and beat him for me. He shut the phone off before Zack could say anything. Growling darkly, he grabbed the damn teasing blonde and roughly pulled him back up on the bed. You're going to regret that. Promises, promises. Nice pad, Shinra. Reno walked down the stairs of Malfoy Manor. For being this big badass family, it actually was a fairly nice looking home. Granted, it didn't exactly scream cozy like the Weasley family home did, but it was still warm considering the family that owned it. As I tried to tell everyone, my parents this go around are not bad people. Little misguided but not bad. They do genuinely care for me, I didn't have a wet nurse when I was a baby. I didn't have a nanny all through my life. My mother actually raised me completely from birth. Yo, I never would have honestly pictured that. Reno was dressed in his normal lazy attire, though he had made sure to stay well clear of anything Weasley related. As far as the Malfoys would be concerned, he was Reno Sinclair. A pure-blood American just moved to England. A lot of people wouldn't. Most people that see Lucius think he's an abuser and a cold-hearted bastard. He's not Father of the Year, but he's not worth of the worst title either. They were heading for the drawing room where his parents normally were this time of day, Darknation padding along beside her master. Ever since Deae had been reacquainted with Rufus, she refused to leave his side. She was a very well-trained guardhound that loved biting him in the ass. This is gonna be weird, you. Meeting them and not being hated right off the bat. He was so used to being sneered at and looked down on because his family was considered blood traitors. Hopefully their views will be changing. I'm going to work on them about leaving the snake and joining our side. Not Dumbledore. Shinra. Rufus smirked. One thing he was very well known for was his silver tongue. Tseng had taught him well. Normally I would tell you to act like a Turk, but this time just be yourself. Reno snorted at that and shook his head. Maybe pretending to be a Turk for once in his life would be the better option. Actually. Reno smirked. Time to blow his lover out of the water. There was something about him that no one, not even Tseng, knew about it. Seeing that glint in Reno's eyes was making Rufus slightly nervous. That look was never a good thing. Just behave yourself. Moving to the drawing room, Rufus pushed it open and moved in. The hearth was lit as it always was, giving off a soft glow on the deep purple walls. The floor, while a dark wood, was covered in bright rugs that helped to light up the room and make it appear more open. It really was the exact opposite in what Reno would have pictured the Malfoy mansion looking. Lucius was sitting in a chair reading over the Daily Prophet, 2 Irish wolfhounds laying at his feet and a glass of what he assumed to be brandy sitting on a small round end table next to the chair. Surprisingly, he was in a deep red lounge jacket and not the heavy green and black robes he normally wore. Narcissa was leaning up against the arm of the couch facing the fire, silently reading over a book. She was dressed in a warm light blue simple dress that hugged her figure. Darknation, ever at home, already gently padded into the room and up to lay in front of the fire. Narcissa jumped slightly and placed her hand on her chest. That dog scared her every time it came into the room. I swear, Lucius, our son comes home with the strangest pets. Snickering, Rufus looked to Reno, seeing a red brow raised. I used to bring magical animals home all the time when I was younger. Pushing his hair back behind his ear, Rufus moved up to stand by his parents. Come now, mother, Deae is not all that strange. Closing her book, Narcissa smiled up at her son gently, her blue eyes shifting over to the guardhound snoozing by the fire. Come now, Draco, no one has been able to even tell us what sort of magical creature she is. Does that not come across as strange to you? Lucius asked, looking over his paper at his son. Rufus was right, they were completely different people when they weren't sticking their noses up at you. Laughing, Rufus moved over to where Deae was looking up. Her expression, if it was possible, looked insulted. Look, Dad, you insulted her. She isn't weird, are you, girl? Leaning down, Rufus wrapped his arms around her, hugging her tightly. Deae actually started to purr as she turned into her master before hissing at Lucius, telling him off in her own way. Unable to help it, Reno laughed. He might hate that damn thing, but she had one hell of a personality on her. Hearing the strange laugh, both Narcissa and Lucius looked over, seeing the strange boy standing not far away. Mother, father. This is the boy I was talking about. Rufus stood acting as the perfect son and motioned for Reno to come closer. Shifting slightly on his feet, Reno moved forward, a soft smile moving onto his lips. Well, he wasn't roasted yet. Mom, Dad. This is Reno Sinclair, the young American that transferred over. Reno, these are my parents, Lucius Malfoy and Narcissa Malfoy. Smiling, Reno actually bowed slightly, his whole demeanor changing. Thank you for allowing me entrance into your beautiful home. It's a pleasure to meet you both finally. Draco has been a very large help in adjusting to the ways of Hogwarts. Rufus went slack-jawed. Reno had completely lost the slum rat accent that he always had. His movements and words were instead that of a well-bred gentleman. You as well, Reno, please have a seat. Lucius motioned towards the chair across from him. Nodding, Reno moved over and sat down gracefully, not sending his lover a second glance. Oh, Rufus was in for the shock of his life, he could tell you that much. Reno, that is an unusual name. Is that not a city in the States? Lucius asked, his grey eyes watching Reno carefully. Nickname Mr. Malfoy. My real name is Renton. I used to get teased a lot at school for my name. After my father died and I was forced to live with my mother, I changed. I started to go by Reno. It just kind of stuck. Renton? Rufus had a brow raised as he looked to his lover. He didn't know the boy's name was Renton. His files all stated his name was Reno. Reno merely grinned at him. That you don't know everything, light shining in his eyes. Oh, they were going to have a very long talk after this. Maybe after he got his brains fucked out by the man, but a long talk nonetheless. You say forced to live with your mother. Did your parents not live together? It was actually very rare in the wizardry world for families to be divorced. That was more of a Mull thing. Reno shook his head, folding his hands in his lap. My mother left my father when I was about 5 years old. We weren't the richest family in the world, but my father made a decent amount from his magical instruments that he made. My mother had a very addictive personality. She was involved in a hit and run when I was 3 and she was accidentally taken to a Mull hospital instead of a magical one. She was introduced to Mull narcotic drugs and unfortunately she became hooked. Reno looked away. This was all true with slight twists for the purer bloods around him. Nothing we did could help her. No potion, no amount of magic could cure addiction. It got worse. She needed stronger drugs. She bled our family dry of all funds, and when Dad could no longer support her habit and refused to pimp me out on the street corner, she left. He shrugged, more than used to the life he had been forced to live. His father had died when he was young and he was forced away from his loving grandparents to live with his Mako-addicted mother several thousand miles from Mydeel, where he was born, to the slums of Midgar. Narcissa had sat up and was looking at him with sympathy. Surprisingly. That's horrible to hear. Made worse that it was Mull medication that started it. It's all right, yo. If it wasn't that, it would have been something else. Forgive me. After living with my mother, I had to adapt a new speech pattern. It's become so natural I do not realize I have fallen back. Lucius shook his head slightly. Already having forgiven the boy, he had known witches and wizards that had succumbed themselves to the horrid drugs of the Mull world. Do you still live with her? Narcissa asked. She was already starting to grow a soft spot for the young boy. She hadn't known what to expect when Draco first told her of his American friend, especially when she had seen the way the boy was dressed, but hearing him now she could see he was simply fitting into the world he was forced into. Nah, I live with an old friend of mine that moved over from the States, Sengac era. He's a few years older than me, but he's basically my second father. Though right now he's back in the state visiting a friend for Christmas. I offered him to stay here for Christmas so he's not alone. Is that all right, Father? That is fine, Draco. Why don't you show him to one of the guest rooms? I will have Millie prepare it and set an extra plate for dinner. Standing up, Reno bowed slightly as Rufus stood as well. Thank you, Mr. Malfoy. I promise that I will not intrude too much upon your hospitality. Lucius nodded before turning back to his paper. Grabbing Reno's arm, Rufus steered him out of the room. We need to talk.
I'm glad you enjoyed that video/gameplay. Just remember to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment down below. Until next time, goodbye!